worked 47 days straight. That night, I went with a couple friends to a local concert band that we all grew up liking. And I actually fell asleep halfway through the concert because I was just so exhausted. And it kind of hit me at that point. One of my buddies was just like, hey, what is going on here? And that was when I realized, okay, we need to have a little work-life balance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ryan Reflects. My name is Dr. Ryan Corte, and today I have Dr. Aaron Neufeld on the podcast with me. He is nothing short of incredible, a very accomplished young optometrist who is doing a lot for our profession, not only in how he practices in the state of California, but in the forum and in the resource-driven tools that they have provided us as eye care professionals. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate that introduction.
Yeah, no, well, for those who don't know you, because I feel like I could introduce you and I could read off your bio, but for those who don't know you and want to see a little bit more about who you are, just tell everybody about yourself.
Absolutely. So I went to undergrad at UCLA, then went to SCO out in Memphis, Tennessee for optometry school. Graduated way back in 2015. I like to think of myself as a new grad, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I think now I'm an older optometrist. But yeah, decided to come back to the Bay Area where I'm from and bought a private practice about a year out of school. And that kind of started my practice ownership journey. That's out in Los Altos, which is the South Bay area. A couple years after that, started ODs on Finance, which started out as just a small Facebook group with my co-founder, Dr. Dat Bowie. And that grew rapidly, and now we've got 30,000 optometrists that are a part of it, whether it be the newsletter, the platform on social media, or the website, or the webinars that we hold on a monthly basis. So that's been a great thing to see grow, and we've helped a lot of ODs on the way, and we continue to want to help ODs financially, both from a practice standpoint and also a personal standpoint as well. And other than that, more recently, bought two more practices, actually in the same town that I live in, Mountain View. And we recently, just yesterday, actually merged them together and bought a building and put them in a brand new building, about double the size of what they were before. And we're excited to get that rolling. So this past 48, 72 hours, I've just been moving furniture, moving equipment, and getting everything going. So it's been an awesome journey, and I have a great partner, Dr. Matt Tran, who's a younger OD that's been with me on that journey. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, and you also just hosted a CE continuing education 4-hour event, 4+ hours, right, with everything put together just on Sunday. So we will get to all that, but I want to take a step back here. So you're from California, you went to UCLA, and then you made the trip all the way across the country over to Tennessee, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How did that transpire? Like, what did that look like in your mind of going to undergrad in your state and then after that saying, you know what, I want to see what the East Coast or the eastern side of the country is like? How did you make that decision?
Yeah, there's two stories I attach to this. There's the story that's just easy to tell, which is like I just wanted something different. And then there's the real story, which is when I was initially applying to optometry school, you had that universal application back in the day, and I thought I clicked on SCCO because that was just a 30-minute drive from UCLA. Turns out I clicked on SCO on accident, and I somehow got an email back that I had an interview there. And so I got on the phone to schedule it, and excuse my dog back there. And the funny thing was, when I scheduled the interview, I thought that SCCO was outsourcing because this guy had a really strong Southern accent, extremely nice and hospitable guy. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then they gave me the address, and it was sure enough Memphis, Tennessee. So I ended up going out there for the interview, long story short, and absolutely fell in love with the campus and really did want to try something new and just something completely different. So went out there for 4 years, and I think it's important for all ODs out there, or even if you're a student, just have a new experience and just kind of experience different perspectives. It's nice to come back home, but to have that different perspective is very, very key, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, you could have stayed local. You could have applied and been like, all right, you know what? I want to stay in the state of California. Obviously, you set up shop there, and you know the pros and cons of doing so. But to get a different perspective, to go out on a limb and move into a different time zone, and that's probably the first time you've ever spent a lot of time in that time zone, do it for 4 years, build a network through, and SEO is extremely well established, right? So that was a leap of faith. That was definitely a leap of faith. So during your time as a student, I'm sure you learned a lot, obviously, to become an optometrist, but tell me a little bit about what started fueling this entrepreneurial spirit, practice owner spirit. Like, what did that look like during your time at SCO?
Yeah, definitely. I will say, hands down, SCO, I think, is one of the best schools if you're wanting to get into practice ownership. There is so much business education they give. Dr. Lisa Wade and the rest of the team there are fantastic. And they're not paying me to say this. I just think that they're great at what they do. And pretty much when I look at my graduating class in 2015, most of us are practice owners at this point. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case at other schools as well, but that's definitely something they instilled in us. They gave us a lot of hands-on experience as well. So just going to different practices, seeing how these private practices ran in the Memphis area. They also took us to Nashville, and I even went to Knoxville as well, just to see how all these practices ran. And the scope out there a lot better than California's scope. So we got to see a lot of really medical practices that are doing advanced procedures, and that was really inspiring. And just the idea that optometry is probably one of the few healthcare professions where we can get into ownership, and it's not necessarily easy, but the pathway is there. It's not like if you're becoming an MD and you're most likely going to work in a hospital with an OD setting. It's very, very possible to own a practice and control your destiny.
Yeah, I went to Ohio State for optometry school, and one of the key reasons I selected Ohio State over other schools was they had a 4-year curriculum built out for optometric practice management and business. It's something we hear all the time from students and even new grads and seasoned doctors across the country. How do you feel like these schools that aren't maybe the few that have really dug into the weeds and got those resources for the students, what steps can they take to better educate their students before they get out into the real world?
I think the number one thing is to at least have a class on basic practice ownership. I know it's not something that's going to be on board, so a lot of schools kind of push it to the side. But just to have that experience, to have that general knowledge, so at least when you get out there, there's that inkling of, hey, I don't have to be an associate. And there's nothing wrong with being an associate. There's
No,
plenty of
not at
associates that
all.
are very happy with what they do. But I think a lot of
Yeah.
ODs kind of realize that potential of ownership, some of them later on. And, I've talked with a lot of ODs in their 40s, 50s, and I even talked with one recently, 62 years old, going to make the leap into practice ownership after 30 plus years of being an associate. So it's definitely out there, but just having that knowledge and that confidence, that's probably the number one thing that really stands in the way is, hey, can I actually do this? Can I take this risk and become successful? I think that's going to help both ODs and also our profession as a whole. So just having some sort of education there.
And optometry is truly unique, as you referenced. We do have kind of a broad landscape of ways that we can practice. You can be an associate. You can set up a private practice next to an adjacent corporate enterprise. You can, set up your own brick and mortar private practice. There are, people that work at the VA Medical Center, at, ophthalmology, so OD/MD practices, community health clinics, and not to mention industry and all the different facets that are available there. I almost feel like the schools could do a little bit better job in general of educating on all of those different pathways so people can put together their goals and a little bit more about what they want out of their career so they can dive in a little further as they get into fourth year, as they get into 1, 2, 3 years out, or if they do a residency. How do you feel that current students, when they're coming out and they're getting into their first couple years of optometry practice, how do you feel like they are navigating that? Tell me a little bit about, like, you talk to so many different new grads. What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions. That's the number one thing that we tend to see when new grads reach out to us. And, it's not even new grads. I've had plenty of consult calls with third and fourth years as well, just trying to figure out what they're going to do. And
Mm.
ultimately, I think a lot of it comes with experience. So it's not like you get out and day one, you know exactly what the rest of your career is going to be like. You got to experiment a little bit, take on different jobs. I always tell ODs, if you're not sure, you take on multiple jobs. You might have your full-time job on the weekends. You got to pay back loans anyways. Maybe take a
Yeah.
per somewhere here, somewhere there, so you can get just various experiences. You can see what you like, what you don't like. I mean, not every OD is going to want to be a practice owner. Some want to go into corporate, some want to go into academia, whatever it may be. But just really get that experience early on. And the business aspect of it, if you're interested in ownership at all, it's time to start educating yourself right away. So if your school doesn't offer that education, There are plenty of resources out there. There's plenty of books. The ODs on Finance website, there's just a variety of different things that you can utilize in order to get that education. But it's important to have some groundwork so that when you jump into it, you know what you're doing. You can be successful.
Well, and yeah, you and Dat and your team have put together a ton of resources, and we'll get to that for sure, whether it's the book, the website, all of the webinars you're doing. But you finished up fourth year, and during that time, you had the choice of maybe doing a residency, maybe practicing anywhere across the country, or going back to California. Walk me through like kind of what you were thinking as you were approaching kind of the deadlines, because there's deadlines to apply for residencies and then to start looking at jobs. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I graduated, I wanted to be back on the West Coast somewhere. I just kind of missed the weather and the culture and all of that. Nothing wrong with Tennessee, but 4 years was kind of my time in Tennessee. I did actually apply to a couple residencies because I really actually didn't know what I was going to do that first year out. I know I eventually wanted to own a practice, but I didn't know when that would happen. Applied for residencies, ended up not taking them, and ended up just going back to the Bay Area and picked up a few per diem jobs, a couple corporate gigs here and there, and also a couple private practice ones. And then it was through a bunch of networking. That's when I found the first practice that I purchased. It was actually through a Rotary Club. I was
Really?
brought in as a guest, yeah, and it was of someone I had known, and then he introduced me to an optometrist who was nearing 70 in Los Altos, and he was like, "Hey, maybe you guys can hit it off." We talked. I ended up getting a 1 day job with him for a while, and then I think it was like 3 or 4 months in, he's like, "Hey, I'm looking to retire. Do you want to buy this thing?" And so that was kind of what happened, and really that wouldn't have happened without the networking, without going out of my comfort zone. So, and that would be another thing I would add in terms of just advice for younger ODs out there. Go out of your comfort zone, network, even if it's not optometry specific, but go to your local meetings, whatever it may be, any way to get in front of different folks so that you can have different opportunities.
Well, it's funny you say that, and thank you for sharing that kind of that process. It's not always a simple cut and dry, this is how you do it. There isn't an individualized playbook for every single doctor that they can all follow. All of our journeys are a little bit different, and yours was piece together an opportunity through different corporate and private jobs, get out there, network, work through the process, and look at things fell into place for you. And you were able to acquire your first private practice, but you did so within the first year of graduating. Is that what I heard correct? Is that correct?
I was within the first year, and there was a bunch of circumstances that kind of led to that. I wanted to practice a little more, get a little more experience before I took over, but that was accelerated. Owner ended up getting a really rare form of cancer and passing
Oh,
away soon after, so that kind of accelerated the
yeah.
process. Looking back, would have been great to have more experience, but it is what it is, and I kind of got thrown. It was a baptism by fire essentially, and
Oh
it
man.
all worked out. But yeah, but that's just part of the journey, and it's going to be like that for all. I know there's crazy stories out there for both owners and associates, so that's just kind of how the world works.
So you were working for this doctor 1 day a week, and then he passed away before or after, or
Got diagnosed, and then so he's like, "Hey, we really got to sell this thing." So
okay,
we made the purchase, and of course that was tough because back in that day, it's different now with how financing works for private practices, but back
sure.
then it was a lot tougher to get financing, and they actually looked at your student loan debt. And so I still had student loan debt at that time, and so I had to just pay that down. I was living on basically nothing, working 7 days a week to make sure I could lower that debt and then get that loan. And so that's nowadays it's a little bit easier because of all these doctor loans we have. But
Hmm.
yeah, back then it was kind of the old-fashioned way. So that was another thing to bring into the equation.
How did you navigate the pressure and the stress of how quickly things took place for you? Almost escalated to a point where like you knew what you wanted, you felt it in your heart. This individual talked to you about, where his life was going, and I'm really sorry to hear he passed away. But how did you navigate that? Because that's stressful, right? I mean, there's a lot to pick up on the fly.
Absolutely. And the one thing that happened with that story was I work-life balance was not in my mind at all. And I know this is something that you talk about a lot with your videos and your education, which I think is great. And I think ODs need to understand that, especially when they're coming out of school. But that was not on my mind. So I remember I worked 47 days straight. And on the 47th day, that night, I went with a couple friends to a local concert band that we all grew up liking. And I actually fell asleep halfway through the concert because I was just so exhausted. And it kind of hit me at that point. One of my buddies was just like, "Hey, what, what is going on here? I think you might be overworking yourself." And that was when I realized, okay, we need to have a little work-life balance. Started implementing a few things into the daily routine just to kind of get with myself. Meditation was one, moving all my workouts to mornings when I woke up. So just a lot of things to kind of streamline and making sure to actually take days off. I know if you listen to Dat or myself, we always talk about the early days when we were grinding, but it's not for everyone. And I don't think it's necessarily the only way to get to a quicker point to financial freedom. I think there's other ways to do it, but yeah,
What
definitely.
concert were you at, by the way? I'm just curious.
Oh, it's this band called The Muse or local
Oh
to San
yeah.
Francisco. Have you heard of him?
Oh yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know
Wow.
they kind of past California.
So you fell asleep during that's nuts. And don't hear what I'm not saying. I believe in work-life balance to a degree.
Mhm.
I don't think work-life balance is what everybody wants it to be. It's never going to be 50-50. You have to figure out what works for you, your circumstance in life, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you have kids, whatever that looks like. For me personally, when I got out of optometry school, I went to residency, and then after that, I was down to grind. I was ready to work hard and put in as much time and energy and effort in to continue to, like, as you referenced, pay down student loan debt, put together a good financial future for myself. If anybody is able to do that as a new graduate, if they're in that phase of life where it can allow them to do so, I don't know about you, but I would advise they do, because it really does make life easier when you get out of debt, or when you're able to push that debt down to a very reasonable amount, refinance, and start dreaming bigger. So for those who, you worked a crazy amount of days in a row, you expedited that process, but then you started to put things in play that allowed you to prioritize your health and wellness while also continuing to push yourself. So for those individuals out there that are in that position, what would you advise them? Like, how would you recommend they go about it so that they can, as quickly as possible, put themselves in a better position, whether it's 2, 3, 4 years out of school?
Absolutely. I mean, quite a few things go into it. I'll start with the work-life balance because I think it's important to note that it's exactly what you said. It doesn't have to be 50-50. What's important is finding your passion. If you're doing something that you love, then the work doesn't really feel like it's still work, but it doesn't feel like work, and you're able to go into that with happiness, with a conscious ability where you can be satisfied with that work. The other thing to consider is as you start to grind and as you start to lower that student loan debt, build up your investments, the number one thing that becomes more valuable, and especially if you start a family, is time.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer the cash that you have in the bank. It's no longer you paying down your debt. It's time, because time becomes more valuable, especially if you're in an ownership position. As you work your way up your associate position, you're worth more. And
Yeah.
so allocating that time properly is key. Finding things that, hey, maybe I don't need to be doing this. Maybe I can hire someone to do this. Maybe I can delegate this task. And that's not even just from an ownership perspective, even from a household perspective. Are there things that you can delegate? In our household, we found that, hey, hiring a house cleaner, it just saves us a few hours a week. And those are hours that we can put into our work or into things that we actually enjoy. And so that's just one little example. But yeah, just allocating that time is vital.
It's funny you say that too, because I remember seeing on ODs on Finance, Julie delegates to the T for her at-home activities, right? For a lot of the things that are on her checklist. She's got it down to a science. Like, I got to reach out to her and better incorporate that into my personal side of life, because delegation is important, but delegating to people you trust, and also knowing when to follow up and understand that the job's getting done. So when you got into private practice ownership so quickly, I can only imagine that first year or two was a lot of learning and putting in the hours and trying to understand, what do I trust delegating to others versus what does it have to come back to me to make the final say. What did those first few years look like in your private practice ownership role from a administrative side of the equation? Of course, from the clinical side, we all know that you were seeing patients at a high volume, right? But from an administrative perspective.
Yeah, from the admin side, it was messy at the beginning. And that's the case for most individuals going into practice ownership. Once again, most of what you learn, I mean, you can read as many books as you want, but when you actually get into the thick of it, experience is the best teacher by far. And I'll say that first year was when I made a lot of mistakes, and it was key because it helped me be better in the future. The one thing is definitely delegation and understanding, making sure that you're delegating the proper tasks. Training is vital. And I always tell ODs, if you're going to get into ownership, you have to remember that everything that happens in the practice is your fault. And this is not some sort of weird guilt trip thing. This is the reality. If an optician messes up the job, it's actually your fault because you didn't train them properly, you didn't have the proper systems in place to get that right. Patient has a poor experience, it's always your fault. And I see a lot of owners out there trying to cast blame on others, cast blame on their staff or patients, but really that's not the reality because you get to shape your business. You get to shape what patients come through your door based on what you offer. You get to shape the experience for the patients based on your staff and also your doctors and yourself. And you get to shape how they perceive that experience and how they relate to the world. And that's with basically everything that happens in your exam and also after your exam as well. So just having that all in place and understanding that, and I think that just takes time. Just understanding your clientele, what kind of practice you want to have. Is this going to be an ultra high end practice? Or are you going to you can see a patient once every hour and a half? That's one setup that you can definitely do if you have a patient that's spending thousands of dollars, or maybe you're seeing a patient every 10 minutes. Maybe it's just a high volume practice, and understanding how can I shape the experience so that these patients can maximize their experience with us, and also we can maximize the time that we have.
I couldn't agree more. It all comes back to the buck kind of stops with you as the owner. And, I graduated in 2012 and mistakes continue to happen over time. As long as you acknowledge them, you learn from them, and you grow from them, that's part of life. So is there a particular mistake or two, and if you're comfortable sharing, that really stick out in your mind where you're like, man, I learned, this stressed me out, but I learned so much through it, and I will never make that mistake again, but I will always, address these circumstances in a different way?
Yeah, I'll say there was one mistake that I held on to, and it was from the previous owner. It was one of his mistakes in his business philosophy that I kind of held on to until I read this book called The Pumpkin Plan. If you haven't read it, I think it's an absolutely great book. It's a 2 or 3 hour read. But we had a couple problem patients that I inherited when I bought the practice. And his mantra was you always try to make everyone happy regardless. And what I quickly learned after trying to make these individuals happy was I had to dismiss them. And so I did dismiss them. And now in the future, if we ever have patients of that nature where we even get an inkling of, okay, this is going to be a problem patient, we dismiss them, we cut our losses because that's not worth time. The staff, the culture suffers because everyone's stressed out with this patient. Ultimately, it's doctor time, which is money, and it's probably going to result in some sort of refund and maybe some bad press. So it's easier just to cut the loss immediately. And we've done that. We've probably once a year we'll see a problem patient. It's like, hey, here's everything. You can find another practice. That's just not what's right for our practice. But that was a big mistake at the beginning, was not realizing that, hey, I can even do that. Like I can actually, make this business so that it serves the patients that want to be here. And
well, it's uncomfortable to do too, right? I mean,
exactly.
telling somebody that you can't come back to the practice for care based on how they are treating you, your team, and your time, it's not an easy conversation. You wondered, like, do I need a legal certified letter? Like, what is the process? Which, oh, by the way, I think ODs on Finance could definitely put together a playbook for that one, right? On how to make sure it meets state criteria for state boards, but also, obviously consult an attorney. But here are the basic playbook and steps. But it's not a comfortable situation, and conflict is inevitable, though, right? Like conflict inside the clinic, whether it's amongst your team, whether it's amongst with patients, whether it's colleagues in the area, whether it's, government agencies, insurance companies, conflict happens, but it's navigating and having the ability to resolve conflict and learn from those experiences and move forward. That really makes a huge difference. Was there any initial conflict outside of that you ran into as such a young practice owner with all of the different pieces of your team, whether it's team members, whether it's doctors, people in the community, insurance companies? And if so, how did you navigate those scenarios?
Yeah, and I'll say the second biggest mistake I made was conflict with staff. And what happened was I inherited two wives, the original owner of the practice and then the owner that I bought the practice from. Both their wives still worked in the practice. A couple people told me, hey, this is probably not a good idea to keep these on, but they had been there for 20 years. I'm like, okay, they know the ropes. It's just easier to transition and keep them on. And that ended up being a huge mistake because they were stuck in their ways. They didn't want to change. Previous owner saw a patient once an hour. That wasn't, I mean, we sat around twiddling our thumbs for so long. And so we had to make these changes. And ultimately, it had to be firing these two individuals. And firing someone is already tough. I've had to do it a few times. Actually, my new partner practices, we just had to do it recently, and he couldn't sleep for a couple of nights because it's not a fun thing to do. And you probably are aware you probably had to do it too.
Mm-hmm.
But hiring someone that's 40 years older than you and it's been in the practice for 20 years, that's a rough thing to do. And I think that was something that I kept wanting to run away from and avoid. But ultimately, once it happened, everything fell into place, and that's when the practice really started to run well. We got folks in that really wanted to be there and that were willing to see the vision that I was seeing. But yeah, I was just kind of avoiding those tough conversations, just trying to evade them and realizing, okay, once something happens, when something grows and it's not something good, it's just like cancer. You want to cut it out as soon as possible. You don't want it to metastasize and really affect everything. You want it to knock it out quick.
It's funny you say that too, because the reality is there are a number of things that we have to do as practice owners, or even optometrists that just see patients that can be uncomfortable, whether it's having a difficult conversation with a patient about a prognosis or a diagnosis that you're making, or about insurance coverage, or about, associated fees with the care you're providing, or whether it's firing somebody who's 30, 40 years older than you that's been with the practice you assumed and acquired. When you actually go through those steps, though, and you learn from those experiences, you're leaning into that discomfort, and makes you a better person, but also a better, you're operating as a better practice long term when you stick to your roots, stick to your core values.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you have all of those things outlined in a business plan and your training materials. I can tell you, I have a practice manual. I have different phases of training, core values all built into those things. It's really critical and important. So you had the opportunity to go through these early years, and then as of recently, I've noticed you've gotten really into specialty care, right? So you have your primary, your practice, and then you merged. Did you merge the two specialty care clinics? Then is that what you did?
So we have a specialty care clinic that sits on its own, and
Okay.
both of our main practices also do specialty care as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did that transition look like? Because I'm sure when you first took over that initial practice, with a doctor seeing one patient an hour, it was, let's maximize the primary eye health and vision care and medical care. But when did you really start to diversify into different specialty care within optometry in your clinic?
Yeah, I think my main passion in terms of specialty care is myopia management, and that's something that the previous doctor, he had done one or two ortho K cases, and he's like, hey, this is kind of cool technology, but that was basically it. And we realized there was a lot of patients coming in asking, hey, are there ways to slow down myopia and also ways to correct vision overnight? And of course, ortho K was kind of the solution for that. And we kept building on that. We saw more and more patients, and so we started putting a protocol together for myopia management. We do all three methods, so we also do soft contact lenses and low dose atropine. And just having that protocol, having someone trained at the front desk that's our myopia management champion, that's able to talk through patients everything about myopia management, and just being able to bring that into our practice has helped it grow immensely. And the funny thing is, nowadays, I don't actually see too many myopia management cases because our associates and also my partner has taken on the brunt to that, and he's learned how to grow it even more. And so it's just having all these other doctors that I realize are probably better at it than I am, but just having that group influence and just really growing that specialty. Another one is scleral lenses, so we get a lot of referrals from local cataract surgeons and also local cornea specialists, so we're able to do that in our practice. And besides that, just standard medical care. So we see a lot of glaucoma patients, a lot of dry eye as well. So just implementing different technologies for that. So much on the market right now, and so many resources and things that you can bring into your practice. It's not just giving artificial tears and warm compresses and calling it a day
Yeah.
now. There's so much more that we can do, and these patients, they benefit immensely from it. Especially in our area, everyone's on a computer 12 hours a day. Everyone's a software engineer here. So just having that ability to provide that for them and realizing, hey, it's not just the glasses, it's also because I don't blink, and now I've got these resources to help my dry eye and just help me be better and more comfortable.
Well, yeah, you're in the tech hub, a highly affluent area with people that are staring at screens all day long, and I can only imagine how rampant dry eye is just in your community and the opportunity there. But that's really cool. So you have, a very diversified practice. What prompted the partnership so bring on a partner? What prompted that, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it happened about a year ago. ODs on Finance was obviously growing quite a bit, and now at this point we've got, I guess, technically 8 members of our team, and 4 of us work full time on it. And I really needed to take time out of the practice and work on ODs on Finance because it just wasn't fair to the rest of the team that I was working 5 days a week. And so that's when the partnership search began. And eventually, not too long after, I found Matt. He worked as an associate for about 9 or 10 months, and then he actually bought in, last quarter. And it's been a great journey so far because he's a younger OD, he's hungry, he's bringing a different perspective in, and I'm bringing kind of my perspective, and just mixing those two together and knowing that he's also going to work hard. That really has helped us expand, and that's given me the confidence to go on this kind of people have been calling it the acquisition spree because we've bought 2 practices, we're buying a third one in the course of 6 months. But it's given me the confidence to do that because I know that he can handle everything on the ground. And even if I'm away for ODs on Finance events, or we're at Vision Expo together or something like that, we know that there's someone there and that these practices are still going to run. So it actually works out really well, really synergistically.
Yeah, and finding a partner that you jive with and can trust, it's not easy, right? And so I'm really happy for you guys. That is outstanding. I want to transition now over to the ODs on Finance piece. Let's step back into your early graduation years. Did you and Dat know each other prior to optometry school or during optometry school, or when did you guys first meet? What did that look like? I think I remember hearing it was like a conversation at a bar where you guys were just having a beer as local colleagues, but what did that look like?
Yeah. So we actually met at a lens crafters. We were both doing a per diem job at a lens crafters far away from both our homes, and we just randomly were the 2 doctors there. And so we were chatting that day. It's funny because we both went to UCLA, but we never saw each other because that school is so
It's
massive.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we never ran into each other, even though we had the same major, which was kind of shocking. Also, Julie went there too, which was funny, and we didn't. No,
I did not know all three of you guys went there. That's
ran into
nuts.
each other, even though we all had the same major. But yeah, and we met that one day, exchanged phone numbers, and then a while later, I think at one night we just hung out, had a beer, and then that's when we started talking about, hey, there's a need out here. And really what happened, what sparked ODs on Finance, was we both, at that same LensCrafters location, worked with another doctor that was in his 80s. And he talked about how the reason he's still working is he didn't save enough for retirement. And that just kind of lit a fuse under both of us. Where we're like, hey, there's got to be some education on this, especially nowadays, because back when he graduated, he probably had $10,000 of loans. Now everyone's having 300K, and just being able to navigate that, have a fruitful career, and be able to retire and just live comfortably, I think are vital to this profession because we don't want a bunch of people burning out to have to work until they're 80, 85. That isn't right, especially if we're putting a doctor in front of our name. There should be some way to navigate that. So that's when we started it. It started out as just a forum on Facebook, of course, and it was just a couple hundred ODs just going back and forth about a Roth IRA. But then it grew because I think that knowledge is just so key and so taboo. But hopefully at this point it's not taboo and we can just have open discussions about it.
Gives me goosebumps just hearing that a doctor that was that far into their career kind of disclosed that to you, and you guys were like, wait a minute, there's clearly a challenge here that we need to get ahead of, because as you referenced, optometry school did not cost 250, 300, 350 all said and done 30, 40 years ago. Now, a lot of students are walking out with a significant amount of optometry school debt plus undergraduate debt. And oh, by the way, if they want to have a home or buy a place and start building equity from that perspective, even more debt.
Yeah.
So you guys decided at that moment, let's get this ball rolling. And I was one of the early people on the forum. I really appreciated what you were doing. I still do. And I remember to this day, I don't think there was a single piece of advertising, affiliate-based marketing, any kind of group buys for at least a year, maybe a little bit longer. So walk me through like kind of what was the thought process early on to build the community? Like what did that look like for you two?
Yeah, when we first started it, we had no notion of it being a business or anything of that nature. Ultimately, we just wanted a forum where we could talk back and forth and freely talk about finance. And so for, I think, 2.5 years, we didn't even incorporate it because it was literally just a forum. And it was only at, I think the 2.5 year mark was when one of my patients who's now sold the company, he actually owned one of the refi companies that we work with.
Oh, okay.
And he's like, yeah, I heard about this forum. And I was like, how did you hear about that? And he's like, long story, but he's like, we'd love to give you like a better refi rate specifically for ODs. And we're like, okay, sure enough, we brought them on. And then of course, every refi company followed suit because they're like, hey, ODs need to refi student loans back in the day. Obviously, things are different now with student loans. And so that's kind of what turned it into more of a business. And then once we had the webinars, we're like, okay, now we need to have sponsor support, et cetera, et cetera. So that's when we started turning it into an actual platform. But yeah, for the first 2.5 years, it was 24/7, just passion, just wanting to talk about these things. And actually, I learned so much from those first 2 years because there's a lot I didn't know, a lot that Dad doesn't know as
Sure.
well. And just learning from other colleagues, especially ones that have been in the trenches for years. I know we have some of our all-star kind of ODs that are retired now that just gave their advice, and then some that are midway through their career. So it was great to see all those different perspectives. And then, yeah, that's when we started. I think year one was when we also started building the website and just putting all those resources up so that people could easily reference them. And so that the website's been built. And then the book, of course, was written. The book was probably the most stressful thing we did for ODs on Finance, the original one that's right behind me, the green one.
Yeah.
That was in between. That was when we were still working quite a bit. So we were just doing it in between patients, just adding to a Google Doc. And then yeah, it was a process, and we used our own money to publish that, but it was worth it in the end because a lot of people picked it up and found value in it. So that was just a huge thing for us, and we hope more folks can find value. Now we're able to give the book to everyone for free, which is amazing with our sponsors. So every student, all third years and fourth years in school, get a copy of the student book, and it just shows that this was something that we really needed in our industry. So it just makes us proud and makes us happy and thankful to everyone that
No.
contributed. Yeah.
I mean, I'm grateful. I learned from, I'm definitely one of those individuals that reads a lot, but I'm not a big poster on forums. I don't know why. Maybe it's just something that I just kind of like to absorb it. Maybe I should get a little bit more involved. But I learned so much, even through doing the podcast. I learned through just guests on the podcast and different ways that they go about their career and their personal lives. But you referenced for in those first 2.5 years, you learned a ton. If you had to pick out two or three things that really kind of were like the biggest things that you learned, what would those things be?
Yeah. The number one thing that I learned was that, hey, there is no ceiling to optometry from a financial perspective. And I think that was one of our ODs, Adam Bryan. He kept saying that. And of course, they have a very successful, they're in your area, actually, I think in
Yeah,
North
North
Carolina,
Carolina. Yeah.
super successful practice. And that really pushed me to realize that, hey, in private practice, yeah, he's right. I mean, we can continue growing this thing. We don't have to be. There's this thing in California in the Bay Area where every practice is kind of a mid-level practice, and OD is just assume that that's all you can do with it. And then that's not the case. I mean, you can start marketing, you can start building your practice and really making it and differentiating it. And so that's what we started doing. Started seeing our revenue go up quite a bit, our net revenue, just making changes in the practice and just realizing that, hey, you don't have to be like everyone else. That was the number one thing that I learned. Obviously, kind of a general statement. There's more specific nuances, but that's kind of the general thing. And number two was just learning that, hey, there's a variety of different ODs out there. There are ODs that are struggling just to pay rent, just to put food on the table, and maybe that's student loans, maybe that's other life circumstances. And then there's other ODs out there that are worth eight figures. And in between that, we have a commonality, and that's our profession, and that's our passion for serving our patients. That's why we're all here. That's what brought us here initially. And just realizing that through those commonalities, we can all grow together, whether you're the person with the negative 500,000 net worth or the person with the plus 50 million net worth. It doesn't really matter. We're all the same, and we can all still learn from each other regardless. So those are probably the biggest two lessons that I learned from the early days.
I love that you guys are able to put on these different webinars. And I know you had the ultra high net worth webinar, and there's just so many incredible nuggets of information that these people share that have been uber successful. But on the flip side, there are a lot of doctors out there struggling to make ends meet. Not everybody is designed to own a business. not everybody finds that optometry is their true passion when they get out there 5, 10, 15 years. And so what I love about the forum is it gives insight, it gives positivity and hope and knowledge for a wide range of optometrists just on how to be financially successful. One thing I really absolutely love is just seeing you guys send out a year-end email, and it's like, here are ways to maximize return on investments at the end of the year, whether it's going through different savings, different investment opportunities, different tax laws. When did all these resources start coming into fruition? Like, what did that look like from the early stages, and how has it just compounded since then?
Yeah, well, I think the number one thing is we realize there's a model for just certain things you can do to ensure that you become a millionaire later on in life and retire early. And we talk about them excessively on the forum and on the website, but it's the Roth IRA, the 401k, and the match if you have it, and then of course your HSA, your FSA, and then taxable accounts as well. And just putting that information out because most people just don't know about that. To this day, the Roth IRA, which has become kind of a meme on the forum, is still something that whenever it's posted, we get like 10 messages, both that and I, asking, wait, what is this? I can do this. I'm not over the income limit, et cetera, et cetera. And it just, we walk them through that, but it's still just not common knowledge. And I don't know if that's by design by the government or what it is, but just having that information out there is important because tax advantage accounts are so beneficial for retirement. And then just investing and understanding how to invest, understanding that investing in a taxable account, it takes 2 seconds to open up a Vanguard account. It's 100% free too. A lot of folks just don't know that, and it seems like this foreign concept that they don't want to touch. But realizing that, hey, if we start this early, time horizon, most important thing for investing is just how long you're in the market. So start it early and be successful later.
Yeah, ride the wave and ride the wave. And that's crazy. You guys get all these messages, even though this concept has been discussed on the forum for years. Wait, when did the forum start? What year was that?
It's at the end of 2017. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's been a topic of conversation for many years now, and you still get 5, 10, 15 messages. On that note, how do you manage all of the messaging and all of the responses that it takes to run such an active forum?
Yeah. I mean, it's a team effort. So obviously, Dat and I, and then Julie and Chris are the admin, and we also have a few executive assistants that help out as well. I'll say that I'm by far the worst in terms of replying back. It always takes me a couple hours or even a day or so, but just being on top of it, and especially when the forum first started, that was actually something that was really fun. Was just talking to ODs. I talked to someone in Minnesota or someone in Maine. Places that I normally wouldn't go to, and just being able to see their perspectives and just talking through various financial things or practice ownership things. So it's a fun thing to do just because you get to meet a lot of ODs. And now that we're, at all the major meetings that we normally have a booth at, we get to see these ODs. It's really cool, especially when we have our mixers, just seeing these people in real life and, realizing that, oh, wow, you're actually 6.5 feet tall and not 5 feet tall and all that. But just understanding that, hey, these are real people, and our goal is just to provide some sort of benefit, whether it be financial or career, but just some sort of benefit either from learning from others or learning from the website. That's the goal of ODs on Finance.
No, and you certainly are doing that. And I think that what you've built is a beautiful forum, but also a nice business. And I appreciated you sent an email, I think sometime last year, of like, hey, this is the way that we generate revenue. Full disclosure, like, we have affiliate marketing, we have a buying group, we have advertisements. There are things that happen where we're able to generate income and be successful. And I think a lot of doctors at times are scared to do certain things that are outside of just patient care to generate revenue. And, with all that success, though, probably comes people that are trying to undermine it. How do you navigate some of the negativity that might come on the forum, whether it's people saying nasty things about the profession or about vendors or even about you guys? Like, how do you go about that? Because that is, I'm sure, a challenge that you've ran into multiple times just based on your success.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that definitely pops up. The key thing, if it comes at us, we just ignore it because ultimately there's no need to engage in things of that nature. Just from a personal philosophy, I just don't understand the point of that or view it as something that's valuable for my time or the team's time. So we just kind of ignore it. And there's a great book out there. I know I've mentioned a couple books here, but Ego is the Enemy. If you haven't read that, it's a fantastic book that kind of outlines why people go through these thought processes. And just understanding that's why that person's coming from this perspective helps us. In terms of folks that are, either mad with vendors or just mad with the profession in general, we try to give a different perspective because I
Yeah.
respect that everyone's got opinions, and optometry definitely isn't for everyone. For certain people, it's probably been a horrible experience, and I understand that because it can't be everything to all people. And just kind of understanding where they come from, what the background is, I think that is so key. And I think there's that show Ted Lasso. He always had that
Oh
great
yeah.
quote: "Always be curious." Right? It just don't be judgmental. Be curious. I'm butchering that quote, but he said something along those lines, and I think that's just so key. Whenever you see that negative feedback, even as a practice owner, when you see that, our first thing is always to jump to being defensive or maybe being a little bit angry. But ultimately, it's like, okay, let's get to the root cause of this, because ultimately, all people, I think, are good, and we all have good intentions, because that's how the only way we can really live a successful life. So if we're not having those good intentions, what did that stem from? Is it from an ego perspective? Is it because something happened? Is there a misunderstanding, miscommunication? Normally there's a reason for that, and if we can understand that, then we can address the root cause.
I love that you said that. And I will tell you, you said something around the podcast about the most valuable asset that we have in life is time. And a lot of people will chase money, they'll chase accolades, they'll chase praise and success. But time is the ultimate asset that you can't get back. And so understanding that, and I'm all about having a glass half full, I'm all about being optimistic and positive. And the reality is, I think all of us could find a number of things to complain about in our profession, but also in any healthcare profession if we chose to go down that pathway, or in any business. And so what I love about how you guys navigate these points of conflict or points of contention is taking the high road, speaking to the positivity that could be found in certain areas where it's just so negative, or so it feels like there's such a heavy burden that's behind that topic. And you're right, we cannot make decisions for every optometrist out there, but what you're doing is you're putting your best foot forward. That community is providing a lot of positivity, a lot of value, and you need to continue to keep your foot on the gas. And so this year is, we're hitting 20, we're obviously in 2025. You guys have done so much that there's even more to come. So first I want to ask you, what are some things that you're most proud of in the prior years leading up to this year? And then looking forward into this year, what are some things that you're so excited about that this is just the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah. I think the number one thing that we're proud of is the community, just how much it's grown, how positive it's stayed, even with the amount of members that it has. There's always that possibility of it not being positive, but it still is a very helpful community and a very positive community. So we love that aspect of it. And also the ability to just provide the resources that we've been able to provide is something we've been very proud of, whether it be all the vendor deals, getting that industry best pricing for individuals. Financing has been a big one for me personally. I do a lot of practice calls where I'm consulting with folks that want to cold start or want to buy a practice or become a partner, and just being able to get into that position of ownership and just being able to at least provide a little bit of help and kind of walk them through that process has been very rewarding for me. And looking forward into this next year, a lot of education coming out. We've got a webinar every month and 4 hours of CE on all of those. Also the podcast, which we mentioned earlier, so that's a half-hour CE. And we'll be present at all the events. So if you're ever at an event, just stop by the booth and we'd be happy to chat. And we just want to keep providing both education, resources, and best pricing so that we can be 1 foot ahead in the optometry industry.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And you guys are so young in your careers, yet I feel like this platform has been established and taken over a space that has been so very needed in regards to direct conversations around finance. For those that are maybe, you know, either students or they're new graduates, or maybe they're even seasoned professionals that are really trying to get a hold of their financial careers and their financial trajectory, what advice do you have for them in kind of the playbook, the kind of the appropriate steps to hit the ground running?
Yeah, I would say number one, nothing's impossible. So if you're looking down the barrel of a 400K debt and maybe you're only making 150K a year, don't worry, you're going to take care of it. It's going to take time though. You got to dig deep. You got to realize there is going to be a lot of hard work, and that's just part of it. I think one thing we don't realize when we graduate, we think that that's kind of the end and now it's all smooth sailing, but that's actually when the journey just begins, is when we graduate and jump into practice.
Mm-hmm.
So just realizing that, hey, you've got a big journey ahead of you, but you can shape that however you want to. You control your destiny. Don't listen to the folks out there that say, low reimbursements, et cetera, you're never going to get ahead. This is a bad profession. This is an awesome profession. I still think this is one of the best professions out there, if not the best. But you have to have a game plan. Use the resources, whether it be ODs on Finance or any other resource, just use the resources to become financially successful. Get rid of those debts, start investing early, live a disciplined life, and you're going to reap success. It happens for everyone. There's going to be hurdles. That's just the nature of life, but you're going to get over those and you're going to have a successful life. But just stick with it. That's so important. Just be consistent, be disciplined, and you'll ultimately see success at the end of the road.
Well said. Very well said. And so for you in your life, you are a multi-location practice owner. You're partner of one of the largest forums, if not the largest forum in optometry. What do the next few years look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of practices, we're going to continue growing. So we hope to have a few more locations. Once again, it's the byproduct of having a hungry younger partner. So that's going to continue growing. ODs on Finance, we just want to keep putting out more resources. So we're constantly brainstorming for things that the community needs. So just look forward to that. There might be some new resources, some new material there. But other than that, those are the big things that we just want to keep providing for the community, whether it be for our patients on the practice side or for ODs on the ODs on Finance side.
What about you personally?
Me personally, eventually, looks like we're going to probably have a couple kids in the near future. But no kids right now, just dogs, as you heard earlier. So that'll probably be in the near future. And yeah, just going from there.
I'll tell you what, that right there is, you will be able to relate so much more to anybody who's an optometrist with kids and has a family, because I feel like life pre and post kids are just two different eras, two different chapters of life. And unless you have them, it is a very challenging thing to relate to some of the circumstances that you can get into. So I wish you guys the best of luck, though. Kids are one of the biggest blessings that I've ever experienced. I love my kids with all my heart, and it's why they do what I do. Wonderful. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You are a very impressive optometrist and entrepreneur. And I just really want to sing your praises and let you know how grateful I am for what you guys are doing. If anybody wants to connect with you, obviously they probably know they can easily do so via Facebook. But what is your preferred method that is the easiest way for you to keep track, especially on any of the conversations that we had through this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Easiest way is just to email us. So admin@odsonfinance.com. And that email is seen by all four of the admins. So we'll happily reply as soon as we can.
Outstanding. Well, thank you for your time today. And I wish you the best of luck on all future endeavors.
Ryan, thank you so much. Appreciate the kind words. And I hope this podcast grows.